Today, we're diving into something our sources are calling, well, a paradox. It seems to be a defining emotional challenge for our times. It's this really striking observation right at the heart of our digital lives. We're living in a world that's supposedly more connected than ever, yet lonelier than ever. It just doesn't quite add up.
It really doesn't. It's this great dissonance of the 21st century, isn't it? I mean, the tools for connection are everywhere. Instant messaging, global social media, video calls, they're literally in our pockets all the time.
Yeah.
But what our research is showing, and the sources really hammer this home, is that so much of this connection is, well, surface level. It's transactional, or sometimes it feels performative.
Performative, yeah, like putting on a show.
Exactly. You can build this beautiful online persona, rack up thousands of followers, but then in those quiet moments, the ones that actually count,
Yeah.
you can still feel completely, profoundly unseen. The sheer number of connections, the breadth of the network. It hasn't done much, if anything, to deepen our spiritual or emotional closeness.
And I think that hits the nail on the head. That's the real frustration, isn't it? Communication is instant, it's easy. So why is genuine connection, that feeling of being truly known, why is it so hard to find? But the sources we're looking at today, they don't just diagnose the problem, they pivot pretty quickly to what they see as the necessary solution. They argue that the cure for this deep modern ache of isolation, it isn't just more connection, like more apps or more followers, it's something specific.
Right. It has to be rooted in Christ-centered community.
Christ-centered community. Okay.
And that distinction, that changes everything. This isn't about finding a hobby group or, a social circle based on convenience. This is about finding belonging, a spiritual reality. And the sources, they immediately point us back, setting this historical standard, the early church.
Right.
They didn't just show up for an hour on Sunday. They didn't just share a common interest. The sources are clear. They belonged.
Belonged. That sounds deeper, more committed.
It implies a covenant relationship, a shared life, not just sharing an hour in the same room.
Okay, so that's the challenge then. How do we take that powerful ancient model and make it work today? Especially with everything pulling us apart, all the fragmentation of modern life. That's really our mission for this deep dive. We need to dig into this blueprint the sources provide. We've got to pull out those core principles for rebuilding communities of faith that actually strengthen those spiritual bonds, fight back against this isolation we all feel, and fundamentally shift us from just being faces in a crowd, attending something, to really belonging, to being part of a visible, accountable, spiritual family.
And to do that properly, we really have to start where it all began. At that moment, the church first started figuring out what it meant to be a spiritual family, which of course takes us straight to the book of Acts.
Okay, let's really unpack this blueprint then, this idea of belonging. If we're serious about moving past just, transactional gatherings, we need to look at the original design. And our source material points us right to Acts chapter 2, verses 44 to 47. This is the scriptural foundation, showing how those first believers actually lived out their faith together.
Yeah, and the power in that passage, it's striking. It's in its radical simplicity, but also its total commitment. It paints this picture of a unified life, not just coordinated activities. It kicks off with this absolute statement. All the believers were together and had everything in common.
All the believers.
Right, so just pause on that for a second. Think about the weight of all. This wasn't some small elite group doing this. This was the entire body, choosing togetherness, choosing to share resources as a priority.
I really want to spend some time on that phrase, had everything in common. Because, we read that today and maybe we think, oh, they shared snacks after the service, or maybe borrowed each other's tools. But the sources suggest this was way more radical, right? A huge economic and cultural shift. What did that commitment actually mean in practice?
It meant a complete reordering of their lives, really. Moving away from prioritizing individual self-sufficiency towards the well-being of the whole community. This wasn't just about liking the same things. It was about a shared material life. In that ancient world, having everything in common often meant people were selling property, pooling the money, and making sure that nobody in the community was going without while others had plenty.
Wow.
It was about taking care of real physical needs, putting the collective health of the spiritual family above your own personal comfort or greed, or even just financial independence.
That is radical. It sounds like an economy based on love, not just accumulation.
You could say that, yeah.
And the source material shows how this wasn't just a theoretical ideal. It was expressed in their daily routines, highlighting two specific, very intimate behaviors that reinforce this shared life.
Exactly. First, the text says they were consistently breaking bread in their homes.
In their homes.
And second, they were eating together with glad and sincere hearts. Notice those two things, the location and the spirit. The fellowship wasn't just happening in the official religious building, the temple. It was decentralized. It was happening around kitchen tables.
So it elevates hospitality. It makes sharing a meal almost like a spiritual practice, doesn't it? A daily sacrament of living life together.
Absolutely. And if the fellowship is happening in homes, decentralized like that, what does that tell us about how they saw the connection between physical space and spiritual identity?
Well, it must mean that church wasn't just a place they went to.
Precisely. For generations before, Jewish faith had revolved around the temple, that one central institutional place of worship. But these early believers, they started transforming their own homes, their private spaces, into the main places where spiritual life happened. The powerful insight here, which our sources really pick up on, is that they didn't just attend church, they became the church.
Ah, okay. That's a huge distinction.
It wasn't a building they visited once a week. It was a life they shared every single day.
And that difference between attending and actually being the church, that feels vital for tackling modern isolation. Attendance lets you stay anonymous, right? But identity, being the church, that demands you participate. You can't really hide.
Exactly right. And if you contrast that with how we sometimes approach faith today, almost like consumers, asking, what's this church offering me? What service do I get here? The early church model just flips that whole question on its head. Their actions were based on, what life can I share with you? It shifts the whole mindset from being a consumer to being a contributor, a family member.
Okay, let's dig into that internal part mentioned in the scripture. Glad and sincere hearts. Why is the sincerity of the heart given just as much importance as the sharing of food and resources?
Because the outward action, the sharing, it doesn't mean much if the motivation inside is wrong or if it's forced.
Yeah.
This is where we have to look at the intent behind the action. Sincerity means it's real, it's authentic. The sharing, the hospitality, pooling resources, they weren't doing it for show, to look good. It was genuinely flowing out of their love for God and for each other, for this new spiritual family they were part of.
We got some feedback suggesting we really need to connect sincere hearts to vulnerability, because that seems to be missing in our often lonely but hyper-connected world.
That's a really insightful connection. Sincerity is kind of the antidote to performance-based faith, isn't it? If you're just performing your faith for others, putting on a front, you can never really be known. You'll always feel isolated underneath. But sharing life in your home, breaking bread around your actual messy kitchen table, maybe even admitting your needs or limitations when it comes to resources, that takes incredible vulnerability.
Yeah, it really does.
So if the modern world feels lonely, because we're all terrified of taking off these masks we build, especially online, then the sincere heart is what gives us the freedom to say, look, this is really me, warts and all, and I trust you enough to show you. That kind of sincerity, that vulnerability, it's what made their gathering so powerful and, frankly, life-changing.
So for someone listening today wanting to move from just attending to actually belonging, it sounds like it involves a shift, maybe moving the main location of faith practice from the big building back to their own real, maybe messy kitchen table, and asking themselves that hard question, am I showing up with a polished performance or with a sincere heart?
It means taking seriously that idea that if you are the church, then you carry the responsibility and also the vitality of the community with you, wherever you are. And making that choice to be vulnerable, to be sincere, to let yourself be truly seen, that's the essential first step towards real belonging. And this shift, this focus on sincerity and vulnerability, it leads us perfectly into thinking about how we measure belonging. It's not about the size of the crowd.
Right.
It's about the depth of care for each individual.
Okay, so we've established the goal isn't just more activities, it's building a spiritual family. And our sources define this really clearly. Community is more than friendship, it's spiritual family. I think we need to explore that distinction a bit more. How does spiritual family go beyond just being friends?
Well, friendship, it can often stay somewhat transactional. It might be based on enjoying the same things, shared hobbies, maybe just convenience. We're friends until our interests change or one of us moves away.
Right.
Spiritual family, though, implies something deeper, more covenantal. It suggests a shared destiny, a mutual responsibility for each other's spiritual well-being, and an unconditional kind of acceptance. The kind of bond you might find in a healthy family, ideally, that lasts even when things get tough, that goes beyond just convenience. It means you're signing up to help carry the burdens, not just show up for the parties.
That idea of shared responsibility, that's where it gets real, isn't it? And this is where the source material gives us a really powerful, almost heartbreaking story. It perfectly illustrates the difference between a crowd, which might not even notice someone's pain, and a spiritual family, which is meant to practice compassion.
It is a powerful story. And yeah, gut-wrenching is a good word for it. We hear about this young believer. She's at a total crisis point in her faith. She walks into a church gathering, a place where she should have felt safe, connected, seen. But she wasn't. She was utterly alone in her hurt. And critically, the source says she was ready to give up on faith. She was spiritually drowning right there, physically present in the room.
And in that big environment, what happened? Or rather, what didn't happen? Her pain was just invisible. The source says, no one knew her name. No one noticed her tears. She was connected enough to get herself there physically, but completely isolated in her deepest need. That is just the perfect, tragic picture of that loneliness paradox we started with. Connected, yet alone.
Yeah, the system, in that moment, failed her. The crowd may be focused on the music or the person speaking up front or just caught up in their own stuff. They maintained this distance. And that distance allowed her desperation to just go completely unnoticed. She was like a spiritual ghost haunting a building full of people who were supposed to be her family. And it brings up that question you touched on earlier. How does a large gathering avoid this? How do you prevent this kind of structural failure?
Exactly. Is it just that large groups are inherently bad at this? Or is it more about the structure or maybe the lack of intention? A failure to build in ways to actually see each other?
I think it's the mechanism, the intention. Scale itself isn't necessarily the enemy. Anonymity is. When sincerity gets replaced by performance, like we talked about,
Right.
and the focus shifts from caring for the individual soul to putting on a good collective show, people inevitably fall through the cracks. A crowd, just by its nature, allows for anonymity, and anonymity is the opposite of belonging.
But then in the story, something changes. There's this intervention, and it completely redefines that space for her. Tell us about that intervention again.
Yeah, the sources highlight this one crucial moment. One woman stopped, prayed, listened.
Just one person.
Just one person. It wasn't the main leader, wasn't some official ministry program kicking in. It was just one individual who made a choice. She chose to break out of her routine, to overcome that inertia we all feel, that awkwardness maybe, and just engage in this act of radical care. And that single focused act, it changed everything for that young woman.
And that intentional act, that's what the sources identify as the core lesson here. Community isn't fundamentally about the size of the crowd, it's about the presence of compassion. That individual decision to just stop, to notice the tears, to engage, that's described as the heartbeat of a faith-filled family.
Yeah, and think about the emotional intelligence that takes, just to stop. Most of us, myself included, were rushing to the next thing, trying to avoid potentially awkward interactions, maybe assuming, oh, someone else will probably help her. Compassion requires you to interrupt your own agenda. It requires active empathy, that ability to try and see beyond the surface, beyond the mask, and recognize there might be a hidden crisis happening.
So if we connect this back to the bigger picture of community health, it suggests that the real vitality isn't measured by how many people are in the seats on Sunday, but by how often these individual compassionate interventions are happening. In the aisles, in the parking lot, over coffee afterwards. That's the real measure.
And that leads us to what the source material presents as the minimum requirement, but maybe also the most powerful one, for fostering belonging. It essentially tells the listener, look, you don't have to be a preacher. You don't need to be a theology expert to make a difference, to strengthen someone's faith. Sometimes you just have to be present.
Being present. It sounds so simple, almost too simple. But if we're digging deep here, what does active presence really look like? Especially today, when we can be physically in a room but mentally miles away, scrolling on our phones or lost in our own worries.
Active presence means consciously setting those distractions aside. It means really listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk, but trying to hear the unspoken things too, the context behind the words. It means offering genuine, focused attention, maybe offering to pray right then, not just saying, I'll pray for you. And it involves that willingness to simply stop, like that woman did, to notice someone who's hurting. It's being willing to be interrupted because people's crises, their moments of need, they rarely fit neatly into our schedules.
That kind of presence, it's the complete opposite of those transactional interactions we talked about. It validates the other person. It tells them, you matter, I see you. So if we combine the vulnerability needed for sincerity from section 1 with this kind of intentional, active compassion, that starts to build a real defense against the isolation. It starts by simply seeing the individual.
Absolutely. And if we think strategically, like the sources suggest later, if the enemy's primary weapon is division and isolation,
Right.
then this kind of intentional, compassionate presence shown by individuals within the community becomes the first line of defense. It transforms the gathering from potentially being a spectator event into a participatory, sometimes even life-saving reality.
Okay, so we've seen the need for individual compassion for seeing the one. Now we need to zoom out a bit and look at how this community functions as a whole collectively. Our sources really emphasize that working together is absolutely central to a faith-filled community. Unity isn't just a nice bonus, it's presented as a strategic necessity.
Yeah, this strategy is baked into the New Testament model right from the start with Jesus' own methods. The source reminds us he didn't send his disciples out into the world alone. He sent them 2 by 2.
2 by 2.
That immediately sets up this framework. Isolation makes you weaker, but partnership, unity, makes you dynamically stronger.
It's more than just having someone to talk to, isn't it? It feels strategic. When you're sent out in pairs, you've got built-in accountability. You have shared spiritual authority, maybe, and critically, a shared witness. Like the old saying, if one falls, the other is there to help them up. If you're alone, you're just exposed.
Completely exposed. The 2 by 2 structure is designed to ensure that spiritual challenges, the battles you face, are never meant to be faced in total solitude. It's almost a mathematical principle as well as a spiritual one. Isolation means 100% of the pressure, the burden falls on you. Partnership automatically shares that load, it doubles the resolve, and it brings diverse perspectives to the situation.
And that strategic thinking, that emphasis on togetherness, it leads right into what the sources call the ultimate promise of collective spiritual power. It's found in Matthew 18, verse 20. The source highlights just how profound this covenant promise is. Where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them.
This is really the definitive statement on the power that comes with unified faith. But there's an insight here that the source brings out for the listener, and it's incredibly freeing. We should probably unpack it carefully. The condition for God's special presence, his active involvement, isn't based on getting everything perfect. He didn't say, I'll be there if you're flawless, or if you get all the doctrine exactly right.
Right.
He promised his presence specifically if you're together, if you gather in his name.
That is huge, because it dramatically lowers the barrier for entry, doesn't it? It takes the focus off my individual performance, my moral perfection, which, let's be honest, none of us achieve, and puts it squarely on the simple commitment to gather with others, focused on him. It means unity itself, the act of coming together in his name, is what draws his presence.
And if unity is the prerequisite for experiencing that unique dimension of Christ's presence and power, then unity stops being optional. It becomes the critical condition. It kind of takes the pressure off achieving doctrinal uniformity on every single point or having a perfectly run organization. The emphasis shifts entirely to the commitment to walk together. The focus is on the collective heart, the shared purpose, not an individual purity test.
Okay, so if unity is the key condition for power and presence, it makes perfect sense why our source material then introduces this idea that the enemy's greatest weapon. It might not be the obvious temptations that attack us individually. It might be something far more effective at crippling the whole body. And that weapon is division.
Division is so insidious because it directly attacks the very mechanism unity that's designed to attract Christ's presence and provide that collective strength. You know, temptation might cause one person to stumble, maybe even fall away. But division can neutralize hundreds, even thousands, by turning their energy and focus inward against each other. It plays on our very human tendencies towards criticism, maybe gossip, getting bogged down in arguments over secondary issues instead of focusing on the primary unity we have in Christ.
And the implication there, which we should probably explore, is that division works so well because it pushes people right back into that isolation, that anonymity that the early church model, the spiritual family model, was designed to overcome.
Exactly. When a community starts to fracture, when trust breaks down, what happens? Individuals who feel hurt or betrayed or misunderstood, they tend to withdraw. They pull back. They become isolated again, unseen again, and they might start feeling ready to give up on faith altogether, just like that young woman in the story we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The source puts it in bluntly, a united church is an unstoppable force. But if division gets a foothold, that force gets fragmented. It shatters into isolated, weakened individuals.
But if unity wins out, if the community holds together, the sources say the spiritual benefits are immediate and tangible. They list 3 things. When we walk together, our battles become lighter, our prayers become louder, and our witness becomes brighter. Let's break those down.
Okay, lighter battles. That speaks directly to that idea of shared burdens, which comes up again in Galatians 6.2, something we'll look at next. It's the practical result of not carrying the weight alone.
Makes sense.
Louder prayers that points to the collective power, the increased volume and perhaps fervor that comes from unity. Imagine the difference in spiritual atmosphere between one isolated person praying, maybe feeling full of doubt, versus even just 2 or 3 sincere hearts joining together. There's a different resonance.
Yeah, a different energy.
And brighter witness. That's about the outward impact, how the community looks to the world outside. Remember in Acts, it says the early church had favor with all the people. Why? Their love, their unity, it was visible, it was attractive, it drew people in, especially in a world that was likely just as lonely and fragmented back then in different ways.
This strategic importance of unity, it brings us back to that dynamic between the big crowd and the small, intimate gathering, and it leads to what might be the source's most provocative thought about spiritual renewal, about revival. The suggestion is maybe a revival doesn't start on the big stages, in those large, sometimes anonymous gatherings.
Maybe, the source suggests, revival starts at the dinner table.
Wow.
That insight makes a direct line between the biggest possible spiritual outcome, a widespread, transformative renewal of faith, and the smallest, most intimate setting. It connects right back to that Acts blueprint, breaking bread in their homes. It suggests the real engine of spiritual power isn't necessarily the big production or the charismatic speaker, it's the consistent, faithful, sincere relationships being built.
That connection is really powerful. It implies that the true spiritual energy isn't just generated by the Sunday morning service, but it's cultivated through the week by those small groups, those 2 or 3 people committed to Christ-centered unity. It's happening in the fertile ground created by those sincere hearts, where compassion and sharing life are practiced day in, day out.
It completely reframes where we should be looking for signs of God moving. Not just at the big conferences or impressive buildings, but maybe we should be looking more closely at the spontaneous prayers happening over coffee, at the shared meals where people are being real with each other, the vulnerable conversations happening in living rooms. That, the sources suggest, might be the true hidden source of that unstoppable force.
Okay, we've got the blueprint from Acts. We understand the strategic importance of compassion and unity. Now we really need to get down to the practical stuff, the tangible, hands-on work of this community. And this section seems to center entirely on this mandate to carry each other's burdens, drawing from Galatians chapter 6, verse 2.
Yes, this verse acts like the theological anchor for all that shared responsibility we've been talking about. The source uses Galatians 6.2 to really define the primary job description of a spiritual family. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ.
The weight of that command, fulfill the law of Christ, that sounds massive. It's not just saying be nice or help out when you can. The goal is ultimate. It's fulfilling the very law of Christ. We need to unpack that. What exactly is the law of Christ in this context? And how does carrying burdens actually fulfill it?
Fundamentally, the law of Christ is the law of love. But not just any love. It's the specific kind of love Jesus demonstrated. Sacrificial, active, completely focused on the other person. So to fulfill that law means we have to embody that kind of love in real, tangible ways. The sources are suggesting that love isn't meant to be just an abstract feeling we have, or a belief we hold passively. It's an active practice. It involves sharing in suffering, sharing responsibility, sharing the actual labor involved in someone else's struggle. When you physically or emotionally step in to help someone carry a weight that's crushing them, whether that weight is spiritual, emotional, financial, whatever you are actively demonstrating Christ's law of love in the world, you're making it visible.
Let's think about modern burdens for a second. In the first century, maybe the burdens were more obvious. Physical debt, persecution, sickness without much medical care. What does burden carrying look like today in our communities?
Well, today's burdens are often invisible, aren't they? But just as crushing. We're talking about the immense burden of the mental health crisis, the anxiety, the depression, the deep isolation people feel, often suffering in silence. We carry huge financial burdens, debt, job insecurity, the stress of just making ends meet in a tough economy. We carry the burdens of parenting, especially in challenging circumstances, vocational uncertainty, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? And of course, deep spiritual burdens, doubt, grief, wrestling with faith questions.
And the power of that Galatians verse and the way the source uses it is that it doesn't just say, oh, feel sympathy for your neighbor. It commands action. Carry.
It demands action. It's active. The source material really stresses this. When you show up, pray together, carry one another's burdens, that's when you become a living reflection of Christ's love. It goes right back to that story about compassion. It wasn't enough for that woman to just feel bad for the crying girl. She had to stop, she had to engage, she had to participate in that moment of pain. Showing up might mean literally showing up to help someone move house. It might mean offering practical help, like childcare or a meal. It could mean financial help, if that's appropriate and possible. Or sometimes it's just the ministry of presence, sitting in silence with someone who's grieving, letting them know they're not alone in it. The simple act of sharing the load prevents that isolated individual from being completely overwhelmed and crushed by it.
This really transforms the whole dynamic of community, doesn't it? It means the individual isn't expected to just tough it out, maintain their faith, or solve their crises all by themselves in a vacuum. The group, the spiritual family, becomes like a spiritual hospital and maybe support unit all at once. Everyone is simultaneously being cared for and also actively caring for others. It's reciprocal.
Exactly. And this whole framework, this understanding of active burden bearing, it leads us directly to the most practical, actionable advice the sources offer. This is for the listener who's hearing all this, feeling motivated to push back against isolation, but maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed, thinking, okay, but what can I actually do? The sources detail 3 really specific, immediate calls to action. Simple steps anyone can take to start building community right now.
Okay, let's dedicate some time to each of these. They seem really concrete. The first one is about taking initiative. Number 1, reach out. And it says explicitly, text that friend. Why is something that seems so small, like sending a text, presented as so critical?
Because it directly combats that modern barrier of social inertia, or maybe just awkwardness. In a world where people feel lonely, many are just waiting passively. They're hoping someone else will make the first move. Maybe they're afraid of being rejected or feeling like they're bothering someone.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
So the source material flips it and says, you be the one. You be the proactive force. That simple text message, just a brief, sincere, hey, thinking of you, or how are things? Not some heavy obligation. That small act can often be the very thing that breaks through the isolation for the person receiving it. It's a little act of faith, really. Overcoming your own hesitation or self-focus to connect with someone else.
Okay, simple but powerful. Number 2 focuses on the spiritual dimension. Pray for that person, not just a vague, God bless everyone, but intentional prayer, directed specifically towards the person you just reached out to, or maybe someone else who's been on your mind.
Yeah, this keeps the action firmly rooted in the faith-filled community model. We're not just talking about a social club. A core function, maybe the core function, of a spiritual family is mutual intercession, praying for each other. When you consciously decide to pray for someone, you are, in a spiritual sense, shouldering a part of their burden. You're fulfilling that law of Christ in the unseen realm. It builds bonds of care and support that go much deeper than just sharing hobbies or liking the same music. It becomes a habit of mutual spiritual dependence.
Right. And the third practical step brings us back to physical presence and visibility. Invite someone to sit with you. This echoes that hospitality, that genuine presence of the early church we saw in Acts, breaking bread in homes, eating together.
This can be a truly radical act of inclusion, especially in larger gatherings where people can feel lost. It actively overcomes the awkwardness and anonymity of the crowd by creating a specific, acknowledged space for connection. Think about it. You're essentially inviting someone from the lonely edges where they might feel unseen, right into the visible circle of the spiritual family, even if it's just sharing a pew or a coffee table. It helps move someone from feeling like a peripheral attendee to being an acknowledged, seen member of the group.
I really like how the source material ties these small, seemingly simple actions, sending a text, saying a prayer, offering a seat to potentially massive outcomes. The summary point emphasizes this. You never know. Your small act of faith might hold someone's breakthrough.
Yes, that connects the individual's compassionate choice right back to the potential for collective transformation. Think back to the story of the woman who stopped and listened in section 2. What she did was a small act of faith in that moment, but the outcome wasn't small at all. The source implies it literally saved someone's faith journey. That's transformative. The call here is for all of us to embody that same kind of compassionate, proactive initiative in these small, everyday ways.
So the ultimate outcome of all this working together, the sincerity, the compassion, the unity, the mutual burden carrying the sources, promise it leads to a community that becomes stronger, bolder, and unbreakable in Christ.
Unbreakable. That word really stands out, doesn't it? It speaks directly to successfully resisting that weapon of division we discussed. A community that is actively, intentionally carrying each other's burdens, that's committed to being real and sincere with each other, and that's unified in its focus on Christ. That kind of community is incredibly resilient. It can't easily be fractured by internal disagreements or external pressures. It becomes a powerful force that not only sustains the faith of its members, but also naturally draws others in. It becomes magnetic. Tag outro.
Well, this deep dive has really shown, I think, that the solution offered by our sources to this modern crisis of connected loneliness, it isn't some complex new program. It's actually a return to something quite simple but profoundly challenging. Sincere, unified community modeled on that original Acts blueprint. If I were to try and synthesize the core message from everything we've looked at, it feels like this. God is calling people back, not just back to attending church as an institution, the building, the Sunday service, but to each other.
Yeah. We've traced that journey pretty carefully, haven't we?
Yeah.
We saw the kind of vulnerability needed back in Acts. We saw the strategic power that comes from unity in that Matthew passage. And then the active command to love through burden bearing in Galatians. It all points to the same dynamic. When faith is lived out in genuine community, when faith actually builds family through those sincere hearts and the willingness to share burdens, then the ultimate promise starts to unfold. Heaven builds revival. Those seemingly small, sincere, intimate gatherings, those moments of real connection, they create the foundation, the necessary structure for that unstoppable force to emerge.
We started with that paradox, global connected, yet intimately lonely. And we seem to be concluding with a very practical mandate. We have the tools, the model, to destroy that loneliness through intentional belonging and a radical act of compassion.
And that leaves us, and you listening, with a final, maybe challenging thought to reflect on. It stems from weighing the implications of unity versus isolation. The forces are adamant. Unity makes the community unshakable, whereas division is the enemy's strategic tool to fracture and weaken it.
So the question we have to leave you with is this. Right now, today, since we know fulfilling the law of Christ happens when we carry each other's burdens, and since unity is what attracts his presence, what practical step, however small, can you take in your daily life to actively embody those sincere hearts we saw in the early church?
Is it finally sending that text message you've been putting off, the one you suspect a friend might really need to receive? Is it making a conscious decision the next time someone starts opening up to you, to really listen, to put aside your own thoughts and agenda and just be fully present for them? Or maybe it's extending that invitation to your dinner table, to sit with you at church, to grab that coffee, the invitation that pulls someone out of the lonely anonymity of the crowd and into the warmth and visibility of real spiritual family.
How might that single, sincere choice you make today actively work to disarm that weapon of division right there in your own immediate circle? It might seem like a small, insignificant action, but maybe, just maybe, it's the spark that helps ignite something much bigger, proving once again that the connections that truly sustain us, the ones that build unbreakable community, are still the ones that happen face to face and heart to heart.